And that speaks volume of what is happening, because really, if you look at, during my program earlier on today, I heard a listener sent in a message and said emphatically that the new NNPC has been set up as a way through which the government can cover up all the stealing and mismanagement that has happened in the NNPC since this current administration came into power. And that is instructive of how we see the government. But from the professional angle and from the facts that as they are, Mr. Aderemi, let's start with you in the studio. What really is the new NNPC?
Well, thank you, Kayode, and thank you for limiting me to look at this from the prism of law and strictly from my professional calling. What I think the challenge is it looks to me that we may not be reading enough as a people. Because if we are, everything that happened on, was it Monday or Tuesday on the 19th, was just the implementation of a law. Nothing more. And so before now, we used to have the NNPC Act. That was collapsed alongside about 13 other laws into what we now have as a Petroleum Industry Act. Section 54 of that act is what births the NNPC Limited.
Okay.
Nothing more. So all that has happened is an implementation of a law. That is one. Number two, I've also listened to arguments that government has created. And I'm not a government official, so let me just correct that.
Okay.
I'm in the private sector.
You're not under their payroll?
No, I'm not under their
All right.
payroll. But I am speaking from my understanding of set of facts and the law.
Okay.
And so that law creates an entity known as NNPC Limited. And the essence of that entity is simply to commercialize NNPC Corporation, what is known as the corporation today. That's all that it has done. So commercialize this entity, make it more commercially focused, make it more profit driven, let it be able to go to London or go to the US to go and raise foreign lending. Let it also start operating with a level of transparency. Let it subject itself to corporate governance principles. Let it start operating with the principles of ESG. That way is only able to attract more funding to itself. More importantly, let it start also governing itself by the provisions of the Companies and the Allied Matters Act. That's simply all that it has said. And when you go to section 2, or subsection 2 of that section 54, you will find out, in fact, there are three key parts there that most people do. In fact, before I go to section 54, let's go back to the PIA itself. Section 2 of it says government intends to now start running the petroleum sector efficiently and transparently. 2B or 2C says government is also going to run that sector profitably. I think that's 2C. And the last one most people may not be paying attention to is the fact that it's also expected to deepen indigenous participation. And so when I listen to arguments from many quarters about what government is doing or what government is not doing, even let's assume for one moment that may be correct. In every problem, it creates opportunities. And so what are the opportunities that abound in this new NNPC?
Okay.
So that's the first point I'd like people to start thinking of.
Okay.
Number two is this entity is now expected to be driving our petroleum resources in the country like its contemporaries, the Shells, the Chevrons, etc. And it's supposed to be operating independently. It's not privatized. And so I see there's a lot of confusion between commercialization of NNPC
I was coming
and
to
privatization.
that to really find out.
It's not privatized.
It's still a public entity.
It is a government entity. The shares of NNPC Limited today are currently held by the Minister of Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Petroleum, and the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, 50% each. And those shares can never be diluted without the express approval of the federal government. Now, does it intend to dilute those shares? Of course it does. Does it intend to bring in more shareholders to run it? Of course it does. So the Act makes provision that when you have other shareholders, those shareholders can now determine the constitution of the board of NNPC. But as it is today, one, you need to engender confidence. Two, it continues to be a government-owned entity, at least until when shareholders come in.
Yeah.
And so where they are today, NNPC Limited is going to be operating, and when it starts operating, in fact, it has started operating, people should pay a bit more attention to it, and you'll be excited at what you will find. All our PSC assets, all our JV assets, even government interest in risk service contracts, everything is now warehoused by NNPC Limited. But guess what? That new entity is going to be administering it for a fee. He didn't used to do that before. So he just runs it. It didn't look like there was real coordination, which is why I agree with Nigerians that many people are skeptical. But people should try and pay attention to this law, and you will be excited with what you will find.
Okay.
So for just one moment, for the PSC assets, for the JV assets, NNPC Limited will now administer it for a fee of about 30% of whatever it makes on it. Will it still be returning money? Of course it will. So it's now like an agent of government managing those. This is what you ordinarily would have engaged someone else to come and do for you before now. And then its revenue, it also needs to retain 20% to run. There's a lot in that law that I think people would like to know more about.
All right. Probably it's a responsibility on journalists to probably take the listeners through the law.
And the government, I must say that, look, so there's what they call post-legislative enlightenment. So it's not just to pass a law and throw that law in the bin or throw it at the faces of Nigerians. No. You pass a law and then you start you start educating people. Look at the host community issues we had for many years in the Niger Delta. Most people don't even know what the opportunities or what the advantages are with that law. Same thing with this PIA. And so many people think, most people don't even know where the NNPC Limited came from. It came from the PIA. The bigger issue, which we may talk about much later, is why is it now that we have passed a framework or a law that seems to give us a good and clear framework of administering our oil assets? Why is it that it is that same period that we're losing most of our critical partners?
That's
IOCs are divesting their interest. What is the problem?
That's
a
one
bigger
thing
issue.
we'll discuss.